Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week, we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
This episode discusses sensitive topics and language that may be difficult for some listeners to hear. Topics include suicide, domestic violence, and sexual assault. The discussion of these topics may be triggering to those who have experience with these difficult situations. Listener discretion is advised. All right. Well, welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. I'm Jamie.
And this is Mahlon.
And we're back for I'm not saying exciting.
I think we've exhausted the word exciting. Again, thesaurus time, right?
I'm so over it.
We are full of jubilation. I don't know what else the word to use.
No, not jubilation. Okay, so we're back for another episode, and we have a guest with us this evening, and we've got an incredible food for thought to chat about. So, Mahlon, why don't you kick us off with our food for thought?
Yes, I would love to. So, this food for thought is all about having honest conversations. And I'm sure we've all, heard that term before or even thought we were having honest conversations. Something happened to me in the last couple days where I was presented with an opportunity where I had to have an honest conversation. And what was taking place was we have a resource at work who is very nice and they try their best, but there are times when this resource is not hitting the mark or I think fulfilling what their job requirements are. And so I was able to have a very nice conversation with this individual, and we were talking about things going on in our day and amongst the team that we work with in the department. And they asked me, they said, "Can we have an honest conversation?" And I said, "Of course." And the person was asking me some very personal questions about, their performance, how they were blending in with the team. And I had a moment in my mind where I said, "Oh, do I have an honest conversation?" Meaning I will just be as nice as I can and make this as easy as possible for the person who's asking for it. Or do I take the opportunity and actually have an honest conversation and try to put it in a way where this person can learn a different perspective, maybe one that they're not aware of from myself, the team. And so I chose the difficult path this time, and I decided to have that honest conversation. Have you ever had an opportunity, Jamie, where you were presented with the option of, or somebody asked you to have one of those honest conversations?
I don't know that I've ever had anyone specifically ask me if we could have an honest conversation, but I think what's interesting about that is you said it was difficult, like it was a difficult request to have an honest conversation. So what is it that made that so hard?
Well, of course, when we're talking about, in this particular case, an honest conversation was there were things going on that was probably not positive. So I'll say most of these things were rooted in negative. So they were either things that this person was experiencing on the team, people were saying by not saying, starting to move around this individual rather than continue using. So when I say this was difficult, I don't know about you, but for me, having honest conversations, as long as it's positive and it's uplifting all day long. The moment that we have to go into something that's maybe a little bit more negative or behavior that we're trying to change, that I try to put still a positive spin on it. And again, I wouldn't call that an honest conversation. I would say that it is a very watered down conversation because you're trying not to hurt the feelings. You're trying not to be perceived as a mean person, but you're still trying to get your point across. This was one of the first times that I said, I'm still going to be professional and I'm still going to try to be as positive as possible, but I am going to request and fulfill that request of this individual, and I'm going to have an honest conversation. And so what I did is I had to give real examples, how the performance was being observed by me, other team members, and really highlight some things that I saw from this individual that probably need some attention and they could probably work on. And that's probably what other people are experiencing too. Mm-hmm. And I had to walk a very straight line because I don't want to speak on behalf of other people. And these were my observations and these were my perspectives. However, I'm assuming other people are noticing too. So it was difficult in the sense that I understand that I'm talking to this individual from my lens, but I'm trying to say it in a way where I'm sure other people who are interacting are seeing similar things or even different things that I'm not. So I was trying to convey that to the individual, and that can be difficult at times.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about your example, though, is that that person gave you consent. From the word go, they said, can we have an honest conversation? And that is implied consent to say, I know this is going to be hard. Please, let's just talk openly about this, right? So it's interesting that even when we have someone saying, please tell me, give me an honest reflection, how hard that can be sometimes. But I like what you're saying about like an honest conversation doesn't have to be all negative, right? It can also, and I think as I've taken on some leadership roles in my life, I think that's what has been the most valuable lesson in leadership that I've learned is that, remaining strength-based, but also being honest and giving that honest feedback is really the best way to foster growth in someone else. And so, those conversations can be hard when it's something that's difficult to talk about. But I think when I have to go into those kind of conversations, I usually keep it, like you said, keep it about my observations, what I'm seeing, how I feel, those kind of statements, because I think that always helps with a healthy outcome. But honest conversations can be hard.
Oh, then this one was hard, and what was interesting is this person which was. I agree with you, which was unique because I don't usually get people to say, hey, I want to have an honest conversation. They say it in some form like, hey, what do you think is going on here? Or, can I ask you a question if I give you a scenario? Like those are the types of things I'm normally, ready for. This person, you're right out of the gate was like, can we have an honest conversation? And I was like, okay. And what was interesting is, and I don't think this person even meant it, but they were trying to get me to say what other people were seeing and almost speaking on behalf of other team members. And I was very cautious to say, these are all mine, because what would be horrible is trying to give somebody some constructive, criticism or feedback and say, this is how the whole team is thinking. And this is what the entire team has been talking about. Because what I was at the time when I was thinking is I want to give this person my perspective and what I'm seeing, because there may be other issues that I don't interact with this individual in such a way where I don't see those other issues. And I didn't want to leave this person with the impression that this was everything that they needed to look at or work on, but I wanted to be as clear as possible and give examples how it related to that person and I's interaction. And that was hard too, because I wanted to kind of leave that space with this individual saying, this is from my lens and my lens only. You probably should go ask a couple other teammates just to see if there's anything other than what I'm saying that will help you, was also a slippery slope, because this individual kept wanting to say, well, what about so-and-so? Do you think they think the same way? And I had to keep pulling it back up. So it was hard in that sense too, because I didn't want other team members to think that I'm speaking on their behalf or speaking behind their back, or even break trust that maybe I didn't have at the time, but it could be perceived as I'm breaking that trust, and it wasn't mine to give. And so, those honest conversations, they sound great, I think, on paper, and again, when they're positive, but when you go into the negative realm, or you have to have some constructive criticism, they can get really difficult. So that was my interaction this week.
What's interesting to me is that of all the people that I know, you are probably the most honest person that I know. Like, I know that if I need that reflection, I know I can come to you and be like, okay, Mahlon, seriously, help me see this in the way that I can't see it. And it's clear that your coworkers must see that in you too, because they picked you to say, hey, can we have this honest conversation? So there's something about you that I think you don't, well, when we were younger, you didn't hold back at all. And the honest conversation was probably your favorite thing to do because it was like, sing. See,
the honest conversation, I brought it to people. I didn't let people ask me. I was like, hey, we need to have an honest conversation, and this is about you. So let's have it out right now.
We need to have an honest conversation because I need to tell you something. So
Exactly.
Oh, well, it sounds like those are always fun situations, especially in the workplace. But at least, well, yeah, I was going to say at least you work remote. I don't know if you're okay with me saying that or not. So
no, and that's fine. But I think we all left on as much of a positive note, and I think the person left knowing, hey, these aren't things that are final. These are things that we're seeing, and they can be changed, and you can work on them. And I think we left in a good space, as much as you can when you have those types of conversations. So I felt good when it was over, but man, navigating that as it was happening was like walking through a minefield. So
yeah. Well, I don't know. I think we're going to have an honest conversation today with our guest. So I think we're going to segue. How was that? Into our
great tie-in, Jamie.
We're working on it. Today we have a special guest, an exciting conversation. We're just going to use all of the words that we're trying not to use. We've got Carter with us from Down Under, joining us on our podcast today. He is the host of a podcast called Touched Out Parenting, and he's joining us today to talk about toxic masculinity. So without further ado, Carter, would you like to introduce yourself a bit and maybe share a little bit about you?
Yeah, g'day guys. Thank you for having me. So my name's Carter. I'm 36 years old. I'm a father of 3. I currently work in youth justice, which in America would be known as juvie or juvenile detention centres or something along those lines. I run the podcast, the Touched Out podcast. It was created as a way of me learning and navigating my parenthood journey. I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD a little over 12 months ago as a 35-year-old man. So it's been quite the mental health journey for me, and I've done a lot of learning about myself and about the world around me, which is super cool. So the podcast so far has 13 episodes out. So I've just wrapped up season 1, along with a bonus episode that I did for Mother's Day to honour my mother and sharing in her story, and the story of her cancer battle and subsequent passing in 2015. So that was quite an emotional journey.
Yeah.
The podcast has led me down a bunch of roads that I never anticipated on going. I ended up being linked in with a national organisation in Australia called PANDA, which is Perinatal Anxiety and Depression Australia. After the birth of my first 2 babies, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression, which is up until I was diagnosed, it's something I didn't know men could be diagnosed with.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
So I ended up linked in with them. I am now a spokesperson for them, and for Men's Mental Health Week this year, I was the face of a national campaign to raise awareness for men's mental health after having a baby, after becoming a parent. So PANDA, they provide support for mothers and fathers in the first 12 months of becoming a parent and subsequent children after that. My beautiful mug was pasted across several internet articles, in newspapers and on national TV news networks. I got sent the statistics for that campaign, and my voice reached roughly 52 million people.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
We are in the presence of a celebrity. That's amazing.
Not quite. Look, and as awesome as all of that is, I wish I could say that it was all a really positive experience.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, one of the news networks that ran my story decided to cut majority of my 5-minute interview and just run with like a 10-second segment of me saying that I was scared I was going to hurt my babies. So they kind of twisted the narrative and made me out to be like potentially a violent parent, which really dampened the whole message that, you know, talking about mental health is supposed to be uplifting and positive. And they kind of, you know, went with the tried and tested narrative of, you know, sinister man could hurt baby. It was a bit of, you know, fear-mongering for views, I guess. But that ties in well with what we're going to talk about today on the podcast.
And can I just say for just a second, we haven't had a lot of guests coming on. I know we're planning to have more, and we're cutting our teeth here. And but I think what's really interesting, and I just want to share with everybody, Carter brought this topic to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was kind of cool. So I don't know if that's normal, like I said, because you're kind of one of the first guests that we're bringing on. But in all of the preparation that Jamie and I did and all the brainstorming of topics, this one wasn't on our radar. But when you brought it to us, I don't know about you, Jamie, but I was just instantly like, that is amazing. And I cannot wait to have that conversation. So I just want to say thanks for, bringing that to us and coming prepared not only to speak, but to speak on the topic that you seem to be passionate about. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for your podcast, because I'll tell you what, I've really enjoyed listening and I've parented in a lot of different situations as, a former foster parent and then adoptive parent. And I work with parents, and, it just adds to the richness of my education in parenting. So it's a great podcast. I've enjoyed it a lot. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the kind words about the podcast, Jamie. It's something that I was really scared to kind of delve into for fear of just failure and not having any people wanting to be guests and talk about their own experiences. But what I've found to be overwhelmingly correct is that everyone has a story, and regardless of who they are, a lot of people don't feel worthy of sharing that story. And luckily for me, I've been able to kind of coerce people into sharing their stories. And then from there, both myself and my guests have found an overwhelmingly positive community of people that have shared experiences and have found solace and comfort in the voices of others, and just found a little bit of light in a dark room where they felt alone. They've realized that other people are going through the same things.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what it's been for me. It's a place where I can hear experiences that are similar or experiences that are different, but knowing that all of those experiences mean we're dealing with stuff, and it's hard. Parenting can be hard, but it's also super rewarding. So it's a great podcast. If any of you guys are looking for a new one, that's the one I would recommend. So
thank you so much.
So toxic masculinity is kind of what we're going to dig into today. So this is a topic that you brought to us, and I'll be super honest. I have some preconceived ideas about what that means in my lens and in my experience, but I'd be interested in hearing what you and Mahlon think about toxic masculinity. What is that for you guys?
Mahlon, I'll let you go first, mate.
Well, so kind of you. So to me, toxic masculinity, and again, I'm going to go off of what my definition of it was before I started digging in and kind of looking at it, because I think that speaks to maybe what the heart of some of the people that, they think they know what toxic masculinity is, or they just gloss over it because, it's another, man-hating term. But I wanted to speak from what I thought it was before we get into it and start kind of talking through the material. So for me, I thought toxic masculinity was where you would be using your masculinity to put people down, or you would be using it to elevate yourself and hold the other, genders down below you, raising yourself up higher than what they are, and really kind of using it as a weapon towards people. That's what my understanding of what toxic masculinity is. When I first, when I heard that term and I was like, okay, I think I get a grasp of what it is. That's where I would probably say the majority of my thoughts and my mindset was setting before I started digging in.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty on par with you as far as what my preconceived notions of toxic masculinity was. To put it really kind of simply, I thought it was a set of negative behaviors or personality traits or characteristics that men have been taught to follow in order to be perceived or to feel as if they are real men in society.
Yeah, and that was something that when I started looking into it, that's what I had the hardest time, and I kind of resisted, to be honest, because I was doing some research and I kept hearing learned behavior. I kept seeing the words learned behavior, almost grooming the younger generation. And it was really starting to kind of make me angry, because I thought, here are all these articles that I'm looking at. They're all talking about how one generation is bringing up another generation of the same, evildoers, and it was men bashing on men bashing on men bashing. And I thought, I have two sons myself, and I thought there is none of that where I am trying to teach my children how to be a man's man and toxic masculinity. And that's where I was really starting to resist the material that I was reading, because it kept trying to tell me generation is grooming the next generation of toxic masculinity, and I was not having that. And I was putting up my walls because I didn't want to think in those terms. And there's still a lot of those terminologies that I've seen in these articles where I still disagree with. It almost comes across as it's all or nothing. And I feel like there's a little bit of a degree between all of these statements that I'm sure we're going to get into. But that one was the first one that I got to where I was like, I'm not willing to accept that a generation grooms the next generation when we're talking about toxic masculinity.
I find that statement interesting, simply because I think there are things. One thing that I have thought about as we've come up to this episode, we talked about this a few weeks ago and getting ready for it and things like that. And one thing I was reflecting on is that, I think that even sometimes things that are not ill-intentioned really do kind of set a mindset that is toxic. For instance, the idea of being a gentleman means opening the door for a woman, right? And there are some women that are like, I can open my own door. Thank you. Right. So to that person, that's a toxic man. I'm going to take care of you trait. But that is something that is kind of set in stone by those ahead of us. You know what I mean? My parents did teach my brother how to be a gentleman, and that was very important. And some of those things might not play that way for different people.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The entire kind of traditional way of treating women, to be a gentleman, to open the door, close the door, pay the bill, things like that, that's for an older generation. While there are definitely women in the world that still appreciate those types of things, and that they overwhelmingly do care about being treated as a woman and being pampered, and they're very much like, you go to work, I will stay home and raise the kids, and I will clean the house, and you get home, take off your boots, put your feet up and wait for dinner and all of that. That traditionalist mentality can be totally fine in other people's worlds, but I think in society as a whole, there's a certain level of evolution that has come with each generation, with the emergence of the internet, with, a more modern take of gender roles and the ever-changing ways in which we see gender roles, wage gaps, women in the workforce, all of those types of things, there's been a shift. And I think masculinity, or the views of masculinity, or the definition of masculinity as a whole, has kind of remained the same. And that may be where there's this divide on normal masculinity in a positive manner versus toxic or extreme masculinity.
Yeah, but one of the things that gets me is who gets to decide if it's masculine or if it's regular masculinity? Because, I hear you and Jamie talking, and I really find I'm going to say fault, but I wouldn't really classify that as toxic masculinity, teaching my young sons how to respect a woman and maybe how to treat them in a way that shows them the most respect you can. That might also be considered a traditional value, but I think that's one that's important, and I think that's one that's not being carried out as much anymore. And on the flip side of that, I also have a daughter that I'm raising. And so I don't know what you would call it. I didn't come across the term, so maybe you guys did. But I'm also telling her, this is what you should expect as a woman from a man. You shouldn't have, she started dating. I said, never will you go out to the car when somebody honks the horn. No, they come up to the door and they get you. And so, yes, some of those things can be considered traditionalist. And I also believe that, the man should chase the woman. I also believe that when you're first starting dating, it is the man who should be paying. So these are principles and thoughts that I've also shared with my daughter. Who knows if she's going to inherit those or if she's going to practice them. But again, those are all things that I'm teaching my children with they're in my mind, they're positive. They're things that you should do to show respect. There's things that you should, as a daughter, you should be seeing these things as a sign of respect for you. And when I hear conversations and I read articles where that's considered underneath the umbrella of toxic masculinity, I have real issue with that.
Mm-hmm. I totally see where you're coming from. And whilst your lessons and the way in which you're kind of going to it are noble and positive, let me reframe it for you and maybe try to have you see it in a different light. By no means am I telling you that the way in which you are parenting and the ideals that you are teaching your children are wrong. You are your own parent. I will never say that you are wrong in doing what you're doing. Excuse me. But on the flip side, me personally, I would be teaching my daughter to have the confidence in setting her own boundaries and figuring out what she values in a relationship before I tell her, never will you go out to a car when it's honked. They will always meet you at the door, blah, 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 blah. That's still a man talking to a woman and telling her what she should expect. Whereas maybe the woman should figure out for herself what she wants to expect and the ideals and the values that are important within herself. So, one woman might not be too worried about the car horn being honked. Maybe the person that she's going on a date with has sensory processing issues and is scared to death of meeting her parents for fear of you being like, you better have my daughter home by 10 o'clock or else I'll be fetching my shotgun.
That's exactly why I want every boy to come up to my house to pick up my daughter. So you have just actually nailed it. So yes, I want if you're listening and wanting to date my daughter, you need to come to the door for that exact reason. So thank you. Sorry, continue.
A little bit of healthy fear is okay, is what Mahlon is saying, I think.
I am good with that, yes. Teenage boys, be afraid. Be very afraid.
Yeah, so I mean, all I'm saying is while the lessons that you are teaching your kids are from a positive nature, perhaps we should be teaching our boys to listen to what a girl who they are courting, what their wants, needs, and boundaries are, and then following accordingly.
Well, and ironically, I think this kind of ties in even to what we were talking about during Food for Thought is, there's that consent thing, you know what I mean? And I think that for a long time, like this is a big conversation right now with young people is teaching them about consent and in all things. And it's interesting because the message that you get from the teenage boy in the driveway honking his horn is probably not the same message that she is getting. But, more importantly, can I open the door for you? Like asking, rather than just assuming. I do see the value in that and the change in that. And I'm personally, I'm a woman that I enjoy when my guy opens the door for me, but we've kind of negotiated that out. You know what I mean? Over the course of our relationship too.
Well, and you're touching on something, Jamie, that I think is very important and not so much that I saw within the research that I had in the articles. I don't know about you, Carter, but for me, the articles that I read were very polarized. It was, this is all bad or this is all good. And, never did they meet. And the one thing that I was bothered by is exactly kind of what you just touched on. Not everything that is being taught from a man or, a masculine point of view to his children, boy or girl, there's positives to those. And sometimes those traits can be perceived or sometimes they could be taken and used negatively. But that's what was bothering me the most is like, there is, I'm not telling my daughter, or at least I'm not trying to tell my daughter that this is the only way you can think. For me, it's a way of saying this is a baseline. Like you have to set your own value. I know you don't know this, Carter, but we want our kids to be free thinkers. We put up boundaries, we put up things for them to stay, safe and healthy, and we have expectations and all those things that you have to do as a parent. But we also teach them to, well, what would you do in this situation? Like something comes up and, hey, mom, dad, what would you do? Well, what do you think you should do? So we do exercise those things with them too, so they can have the autonomy to be a free thinker and kind of come through some of these things on their own, because we're trying to teach them those because they're not going to be at home forever. Fingers crossed. So what I think is really bothering me is the value. It's almost like a starting point. Like, I just want my daughter to know you are worth more than just jumping to someone's beck and call. And somebody should value you enough to say, I want to come to the door and get you, especially the first time. My daughter, if she's been dating someone for a while, I don't know if I would have the same expectation. So if I'm saying the first couple times they're coming to the door, yes, they're going to come, they're going to meet me. That's the expectations. And that should be the value set that she's setting for herself. She should be thinking in terms of, I'm valued enough that this person should come to the door and get me. And if they need to see and meet my parents, that's what they need to do. And again, the base value for my sons are, you don't honk for a girl. You go up to the door. If the parents are there, you will meet them. You will answer their questions. You are respectful of their daughter. You are taking her out. You are going to follow, the best of gentlemen, all of those things. And I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm like, I would not label that as a toxic masculinity concept. I think that is a trait that we're teaching our kids. And yes, it might be coming from the masculine side of things, but what I'm also experiencing with my relationship is my wife, who's very much in line with me, is experiencing and she's kind of saying the same things. And so I'm going to stop here because I keep rambling on, but that's where I have the biggest problem. It almost seems like these articles are saying it's either one or the other. And I do think there's a compromise, like what you were saying, Jamie, like you and your guy came together and you kind of have this understanding of what's acceptable. And I think that's what's being left out of these kind of conversations and these articles that I was reading.
Carter.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, Jamie.
No, that's good.
I will say one more thing and then you can have at it. Look, Mahlon, I would not list any of what you just said or the ideals or lessons that you are teaching your children. I would not list them as toxic masculinity in any way, shape or form. I would list them as a father teaching his own virtues, his own moral compass, passing that on to his children. And I don't think that that's toxic in any way, shape or form.
So can you give us some good examples? I guess I'm assuming that you Carter have some examples of toxic masculinity, maybe as you were growing up, or, some of those things that you've identified as you've learned more about this topic. What can you share some of those with us and maybe give us some good examples of what that looks like for you?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, when I think of toxic masculinity, I think of older generations teaching their kids men shouldn't cry, stiff upper lip, harden up, man up, things like that. Suppress your emotions at all costs because crying is not a manly trait to have. That is a woman thing only. And that's the main thing that I get from toxic masculinity. That's the main trait. Now, in doing that, in suppressing those emotions, I do have some statistics and things like that, and effects on men and effects on society and genders other than male, that toxic masculinity, I'm talking about the extreme side of masculinity, has. So the negative consequences of toxic masculinity on men leads to a lack of emotional intelligence and emotional regulation, because they are taught from a young age to suppress their emotions. Do not cry. Do not show your emotions, because that's pussy shit, to put it in that way, which leads to undiagnosed mental health issues, which leads to a higher risk of suicide, which leads to more generational trauma. So just to reference some statistics here, there's an estimated 703,000 people who die by suicide every year. The global suicide rate is over twice as high among men than there is women.
That's a global...
On top of that, an individual... That's global statistics. Global suicide rate is over twice as high among men. On top of that, an individual that is suffering with depression is 20 times more likely to die by suicide. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think manning up and not talking about your feelings when twice as many men die by suicide each year, there might be something that needs to change.
See, and now you're bleeding over into my work in the mental health field, and I have noticed in the area that I live in, those statistics do kind of follow with what we see here too. Really high rates of suicide amongst men in their upper 30s and early 40s, and I've often wondered if it's because there's so much stigma wrapped around mental health and mental well-being for men. You know, it's okay for us ladies to talk about how that makes us feel, but it's not as okay for our counterparts to do so. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and so now you're touching on something that I think I could relate to, and I think, you know, I experience, and I've been guilty of too. And it can start off with how I was raised, you know, or how I came out of my childhood and into adulthood. However we're gonna call it, I relate very much to the whole emotional spectrum. And, you know, I kind of pride myself that I am a little bit more emotionally intelligent. But I've also learned to kind of look at other people's emotional intelligence, and I've gotten stronger by analyzing other people. When you ask me to start looking about myself, and I think I've said this on the podcast a couple other times, I do not have a very big range of emotions. And that is something that I've always struggled with, and that is something that I've always had to come to terms with. And I've done some other reflections on this through our conversations that we've had. And I can't say that my parents trained me to be that way. I can't say that they purposely said, you know, only girls cry, man up. But what I can say is through observations. You know, one of the things that I can only remember a couple times is seeing my dad cry. I never saw my dad cry. And on the other side, I know you know, my mom, who was probably one of the strongest people, not only women, but people that I knew. And, you know, they did, you know, not say, hey, you need to man up, but it was always, okay, you need to pull yourself together. You need to move on. You need to pick up the pieces. You don't need to wallow on it. You just need to kind of pick up and move on, Mahlon. And I'd say I'd have probably some of the best parents around. They instilled with me a lot of great, you know, a lot of positive attributes. But as I'm hearing you guys talk, that is one of the things that I do have probably a problem with, is it is hard for me to show more than just a couple emotions, and my range isn't very much. And I wonder how much of that is what we're talking about. If that's the closest thing that I can get to having experienced or having some of that toxic masculinity, it would be in that realm, because it is something that I'm not comfortable sharing. It's not something that I am, you know, free to just open up and show my emotions a lot of times.
Those lessons don't just come from our dads either. Those lessons came from our moms too, you know, and I used to think it was, you know, here in the Midwest, we're bootstrappy kind of people. You just pick them up by the bootstraps and move on. But I'm starting to wonder if more of it is a generational thing, that is something that they learned. Their parents grew up in the Great Depression and, really did have to, there was no other option. You just had to bootstrap it. You had to pick it up and just get on with it. And it's interesting how that has shifted over time and how those lessons settled with us and how we function as adults,
Well, and one thing that so I was thinking this, and Jamie, you said it, and so I was glad somebody else said it. That was one of the questions I was going to ask the group is, my mom was a very strong personality in my life, and she was also a very no-nonsense kind of person.
She was tough.
So...
She was tough.
What?
She was tough.
She could be.
Yeah.
She could be. And she was, she was kind, she was loving, but she was firm. And I was just going to ask this group, do you think that some toxic masculinity can be passed down from the moms, from females could be teaching their sons toxic masculinity traits? And that was something that until we were having this conversation, I didn't really even think about too much. And then I swear I had the thought, and Jamie, you said that about your mom. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to go there. So I'm going to leave the question out there. Do you think moms can teach their sons toxic traits, toxic masculinity traits?
100%. 100%. The term toxic masculinity is just a term at the end of the day. It's not gender specific, just like emotions aren't gender specific. And there's going to be people, both male, female, or undisclosed, that have these preconceived notions that perhaps were taught to them in their lives growing up that maybe don't have a very positive place in society these days. It all comes down to a moral compass, really, and that moral compass is a mixture of things from a young age. It's taught by the world around you, which is, your direct world, your family, your parents, growing up, your friendship group. I can lend some knowledge as far as that goes. I come from a broken home. Parents were divorced when I was 5. There was some domestic violence stuff going on. There was custody battles going on. There was a lot of manipulation going on, which led me to have a lot of mental health issues growing up. And because of growing up in a household that was very much a don't talk about your feelings, man up, blah, 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 led me to really just not know who I was as a person. All throughout my childhood and teen years, I was a very unhappy person. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 12, shortly after we moved to a brand new town where I knew no one. So I was very, very much alone and very, very much not capable of handling my emotions, regulating my emotions, or even understanding my emotions, which led me to a non-fatal suicide attempt when I was 13 years old. And yeah, that's really tough. I'm incredibly lucky to be here today. I tried to hang myself and the rope snapped, and that was a second chance for me. And I knew that there was something that I had to change. But even throughout my sorry to get really heavy, throughout my teen years, I had groups of friends that were very much toxic masculinity. They held sexist beliefs. They held misogynistic beliefs. They had preconceived notions that were homophobic, transphobic, racist, all of those things. And they were very, very proud to hold those morals highly. And they made those morals very, very much about their image. That was who they were. They were known around town as that person, and they were just hateful. And I bought into it. And unfortunately, for a lot of my teen years, because I was so lost, and obviously now I know that I also had undiagnosed autism, I saw these people and held those people on pedestals because they made me feel a part of something. They made me feel cared for, which up until then, I've never really felt like anyone cared about me.
Yeah.
That's scary, and it has taken a long, long time for me to unlearn a lot of the shit that my world around me throughout my childhood and teen years taught me.
You know, you said something, you had kind of mentioned domestic violence. And, you know, I wonder what your take is and where your thoughts go when you talk about toxic masculinity as it relates to, relationship violence or domestic abuse and things like that.
So, I mean, toxic masculinity is probably the main cause of domestic violence, right? And I'm not going to say that all domestic violence is perpetrated by men towards a woman or their respective partner, but having that toxic masculinity taught from a young age, and, you know, not being able to talk about your emotions and suppressing your emotions, that leads to that lack of emotional intelligence and regulation. We end up having these kind of preset emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, and all other emotions kind of form under those umbrellas. You know, you could be excited, but because of that emotional intelligence or lack thereof, you would put that into a happy category, just like perhaps you were fearful or frustrated or stressed out. Those things, when you're not regulated and you have a lack of emotional intelligence, fall under an anger category or a sadness category. And because of that, and because you're not wired to be able to communicate these different emotions, you end up bottling, and then that explodes by either having full-blown mental breakdown, and which falls under this sadness category, and you end up doing something silly like committing suicide, or you explode in the anger category, which can lead to you, doing some domestic violence, breaking things, throwing things, yelling, screaming, berating, punching holes in walls, or being physically violent towards your spouse or partner.
So that's one thing, as I'm doing some self-reflection. There are just a few, I would say, key emotions that I kind of use. You had happy, you have sad, anger. And what I found is, and this is something that I've been looking at myself internally for a while now, is I have these umbrellas that these emotions fit under, and I can live underneath this umbrella for a considerable amount of time. I can be happy for quite a while, or I could be angry or sad for quite a while. And then what I've noticed is that when I do go from one to the other, it's a very quick switch. So I can be happy and living in that, under that umbrella for quite some time, and then something can come up and I'm in the angry category. And what I'm finding is, and I've often wondered to myself, do other people have like indications? So when they are leaving happy or excited and they're moving towards angry, they can feel that happening. And so maybe there's things they can do to prevent that from continuing. I never really would have labeled that underneath the conversation we're having now around toxic masculinity, but it does make me wonder, because that seems to be touching on what I've been experiencing for myself, is that I don't really gradually go from one to the other. It's almost, I'm there 1 minute and I'm over here the next. Now, I don't change all the time. I live underneath those umbrellas for quite some time. But when I do change, it is pretty abrupt and pretty quick. And like I said, I've always thought to myself, do other people do that? Or is there something that kind of they start leaning from one emotion into the other?
For me personally, I'm the same. I can snap into different emotions quite quickly, and that is a sign of me within myself. I'm not saying you personally, because we're all different. We all have, a different spectrum of emotion, and we all feel things differently. But that when I snap from happy to sad or to angry or something like that, to me, that is a sign of me becoming dysregulated with my emotions, because of my ADHD as well. It's quite hard for me to pinpoint what has made me change emotion, and it takes a little while for my brain to catch up, because it's just always going. a lot of my dysregulation comes from outside stimuli, so too noisy or any kind of sensory processing that I struggle with. My biggest thing that really gets me from one end of the spectrum to the other as far as my emotions go is if something suddenly happens that changes what I envisioned my plan of the day or the week or the month or whatever goes. So just for an example, if I was to go to work tonight, I expect to go to my regular unit that I would work. If I was to get to work and I was told that I have to go to a different unit tonight for whatever reason, I would 110% instantly become emotionally dysregulated, and my entire 12-hour shift would be ruined. I would be just in such a foul mood. And that's because in my mind, I had my entire night planned out before I got to work. That plan has been changed without my knowledge and without my consent, and now I am angry.
Not that I can't relate to that at all, but I can relate. I wonder, you kind of talked about a little bit about how older generations are training young ones, and I know you're a parent. I'm curious how this understanding about toxic masculinity and your experiences in that has affected your parenting. What do you do differently with your kids to make sure that you are that you're teaching them a different way?
I am teaching my son, especially. I've got one son and two girls. I'm teaching my son especially, who is also on the spectrum. I'm trying to teach him how to navigate his emotions, which being on the spectrum is already an incredibly uphill battle. But we have emotion charts up in the house. When he is in meltdown, we will take him to the emotions charts and we'll try to get him to tell us how he is feeling, what he is feeling. He will point to an emotion. It's usually angry or sad because, he's only 2, so he doesn't quite understand the entire spectrum of emotions yet, but that's something that we will continue doing. But I mainly parent by letting my kids see me cry, see me talk about my emotions. If I get angry with them or if I get frustrated with them and I raise my voice, I'll sit them down once everything's calmed and I'll apologize to them. I'm not above my kids. My kids are there to learn from me and I'm there to learn from them. We're all even in this, there's no children should be seen and not heard. That stuff was taught to me and I hated it, and it led me to a lot of issues within myself. My kids know Dad gets angry sometimes. Dad gets sad sometimes. They're going to see me cry. They're going to see me laugh. They're going to see every range of emotion that I can possibly display because that's how they are going to learn the best. They're going to learn by seeing. And they know that Dad's not perfect. Dad's going to make mistakes. Dad's going to do things that he shouldn't. But as long as Dad can come to them at the end and say, I was wrong. I'm really sorry. I love you with all my heart. Do you forgive me? Let's have a cuddle. Do you need to talk about anything? Are you hurt? What can I do for you? All of those things, they're going to grow up pretty regulated for the most part, I hope.
That was something I noticed too with my kids when they were younger is this need to intentionally teach about emotion. It wasn't something, I don't know that I remember a lot of that intentionality. And so when my kids were young, I often did a lot of okay, are you happy, sad, or mad? We kind of started with the 3 basics, right? And then as they grew in that, I remember one day, I had been drilling this. Okay. Now are we happy, sad, or mad? What's causing what we're experiencing? And I remember one day when my son came out of his room after I had sent him there for a timeout. And he comes out and he's like, just so you know, I'm mad at you. And I was like, oh my gosh, we did it. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that approach because that is something I noticed with my kids too when they were young is that need to intentionally teach about feelings and emotions. So, yeah.
We're going through it with my 4-year-old daughter at the moment, Hendrix. She is very, very much living in the angry zone lately. She's not afraid to tell us, though. She will tell us, I am angry with you. Do not talk to me. You are no longer my best friend.
Oh.
She said to my wife
Ouch.
the other day, I'm changing my name. I'm changing my name. So, and these are just things that are like, Hendrix, can you please go put your socks on? It's time to go. And she'll just flip
Oh
out.
my.
So
She's changing her last name
good,
over
it's
socks.
good fun at the moment. Yeah, so we're very much expecting her to come out with the knapsack on a stick soon, and just be like, I'm leaving forever.
You know, there was many a times growing up I also packed a little knapsack and headed towards the circus because I figured I will live better with them than I can with my parents. And I got about a half a block before my dad would call out, "Get back here!" So, I've also packed a few bags myself growing up.
Yeah.
I do have a question though, and toxic masculinity. Okay, and I think there's been a lot of positive things that we've talked about here. And what I want to ask now is, do you think that that's sometimes used as a weapon towards men? The term toxic masculinity.
Isn't that, I think if there's one thing I have learned about American culture right now is that these little phrases and these little words become lightning rods for division, right? So as much as, toxic masculinity could totally be used as a banner to say all men are terrible, I think the things, when you dig into it and really look at it, as we've done today, it's kind of showing me that, it's probably one of those lightning rod issues, but maybe it's being used as a weapon on both sides. You know what I mean? Just to have something to argue about. But what about you, Carter?
Yeah, I think that it could definitely be used as a weapon, but I think the people that are affected by that weaponized language are probably the people that are perpetrating toxic masculinity. And whilst they may feel marginalized or targeted, they may not be entirely aware that they are part of the problem. We went into the negative consequences of toxic masculinity on men within themselves before. We can also look on the negative consequences that it has on society and other genders and other minorities and things like that. I mean, we have mass shootings. I have some statistics on mass shootings. So let's have a quick look here. Where is it? Sorry. So we're just going to go with the United States statistics. Sorry, guys. From 1982 to 2023, 138 mass shootings were perpetrated by men. Only 4 were perpetrated by females. 2 of them were by both a male and a female, generally led by a man, and 1 was not released. So there's mass shootings. We can get into that more if you would like. That is a gun control issue, but I think more importantly, it is a mental health issue, which ties into shut up, don't talk about your emotions. Toxic masculinity creates a divide amongst men in society. You've got like this alpha and beta culture, like I'm an alpha man and I'll beat my chest and win the woman, and if you're not first, you're last, to quote Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights. We've got the domestic violence thing, which we did discuss. Yeah. In Australia, 1 woman is killed every 9 days by a male partner or former partner.
Wow.
In my hometown, 2 days ago, there was a murder by a man against his girlfriend, I believe. This happens often in Australia. I'm not too sure on the statistics in America, but 1 every 9 days in Australia is far too many. It leads to sexism and misogyny. Women are seen as less than men. Women are seen as objects. There's slut shaming. Women are seen as disgusting if they have a higher amount of previous sexual partners compared to men who are seen as studs and all that. It leads to rape culture, victim blaming. She was asking for it for wearing such a short skirt, things like that, which is just disgusting and nonsensical to me. Wage gap, which, You've had the episode on the wage gap, which is actually how I was introduced to your podcast and why we ended up in contact. So we won't go into that anymore. It also leads to random acts of violence, such as street fights, king hits. We had a massive issue with king hits in our state, in Melbourne. So much so that we had a lot of laws change and a lot more police presence in Melbourne City due to all of the... I'm not sure if you guys know what a king hit is. It's like a coward punch, or like being punched from behind, or when you're not ready for it. So, you'd be out at a nightclub or a pub or whatever have you, and you've had a few drinks with the boys, and someone challenges your manhood or talks to your girlfriend in a way in which you think is disrespectful, and you start beating your chest and you get fired up and it spills out onto the street, and then all of a sudden the bloke that's pissed you off his back's turned, and you go up behind him and you smack him from behind and he falls, hits his head and dies. That happened quite a bit. Quite enough for laws to be passed and enough for a higher police presence to be placed in Melbourne to try and curb that type of behaviour.
Wow.
And the last point I have is it leads to homophobia, transphobia, racism, fear of things that aren't in line with your belief system. And look, that's not just something that's from a male perspective, that's females as well.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that last statement in, because I wanted to make sure when I was doing some research, I was curious. To say, okay, we have toxic masculinity. What would be the opposite if the example that I have is, you see on TikTok, you see on videos everywhere. I don't know in Australia, but I've heard them around here called Karens, like women that are irate and they're causing a big problem and a big scene, and they're very aggressive and they're very in people's face. And in some instances, they are escalating to the point of violence and they are throwing things around, or they are actually physically hurting or putting their hands on someone else. And I was curious. I was like, okay, I've read a lot of toxic masculinity. Is there a term for women who act in that manner? Because I wasn't thinking in the term that toxic masculinity would be applied to both men and women. I was thinking that was a term just reserved for men. So I did a search and I tried to find out, okay, what would be, from a woman's point of view, what would be the equivalent to toxic masculinity? And the closest thing I found was toxic feminism. And when I read it, it still kind of made me angry, to the point of, we have all of the things that we've talked about for toxic masculinity, and some of those things are very tragic, and some of those things I can see a correlation to how somebody was raised. Some of them I'm like, okay, you have to factor in people's personality, religious beliefs, their personality in general. I mean, there's a lot of factors that are going in there, but they're all categories for men and things that they do that are negative. Well, when I found the toxic feminism, it was basically if women allow themselves to be treated as those objects, or they go along with it and saying, hey, I'm going to be a housewife because that's what my husband, my boyfriend, my man wants me to be. Toxic feminism was described as women basically doing those or acting in those roles the way the men are expecting. And what made me a little bit, upset was, I was like, okay, is there no term that is used for women who act and show those signs of aggression? Although it may not be, prominent, it may not be the majority, but I was just curious, is there anything that describes that? And when I found toxic feminism, it still had a negative slant towards men. And I was like, that is ultimately my problem when I hear a lot of this toxic masculinity and now, toxic feminism, is it's slated to men are bad, men are evil. Being a masculine man is wrong. And this conversation is what I really like, because there's nuances to those statements. You can't just have black and white. And Jamie, I think you called it a lightning rod topic, where it's polarizing. And but at the same time, you can't, at least for me, I can't stop thinking about the fact that there's no term for when women act like that, even though it may not be as much as men. And the only term I could find, like I said, still had a negative slant towards men. And I just think that's just interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. I actually did that research myself because I asked my wife this morning, I'm like, so there's feminism and there's extreme feminism. What's the male equivalent? And my wife was like, extreme masculism? It's not a word. And we were just like, it stumped me as well because, generally everything has an opposite, right? But what I figured in my own opinion is there's differences. And while, the toxic moniker or the extreme moniker is, one end of the spectrum to the other, the extreme left, extreme right as political, you've got feminist masculinity is polarizing ends of the spectrum, the same as extreme feminism and toxic masculinity. Toxic femininity stems from an extreme pushback from a patriarchal society's rigid values and traditions. Whereas toxic masculinity, in my opinion, is an internalized set of rules generally taught by father figures or influential men from a young age that is detrimental to the male gender and the progression of modern society. That's the two differences. Without toxic masculinity and without that generational male-led patriarchal society, I don't know if toxic femininity would exist because there wouldn't be a need for a pushback, right? If all along we just communicated and had these worked out set of emotions and we were of a higher emotional intelligence all along and we were able to be like, excuse me, love, I'm worried today because of XXX, or I'm scared today because of XXS, or I'm stressed out, or any range of emotions you can think of. If you are able to clearly, concisely talk about those things, which lends to your food for thought, having honest conversations. If we were able to do that all along and have honest conversations and have boundaries that we could set or have their boundaries that they have set and we respect those boundaries, would there be a need for toxic femininity? I don't think so. There will always be outliers where one person believes they deserve more than the other. That's why we have billionaires, but we won't get into that. At the end of the day, I'm not saying any way of living is wrong because it's all my own opinion. I think anything that goes to an extreme or a toxic place is detrimental to society as a whole. I think the best way to proceed is to try to bring those margins in so we're a little bit closer to the center.
So, the question I had is, do you ever think that there's a situation in which it's okay to express some of those aggressions or some of those toxic masculinity traits?
Probably not.
And what about sports and like boxing and I don't know how much of this, the the martial arts, MMA, yes. There's a big business and there's a big entertainment value to watching guys get into a ring or, through aggression, just smacking the crap out of one another. And you could scan the audience and there's men and women there just enjoying that aggression and that energy and that fight that's in the ring. And so to me, if I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute, to me, it seems to be a little unfair that we can call it, toxic masculinity one way, but yet if it's for an entertainment value, and again, it's in a ring and it's in a controlled environment, but what kind of message does that send when we are saying some of these traits are not something that men should be having and they are very detrimental to society, but in the same time that society is also looking at some of these traits as pure entertainment, and for some people, it's a big moneymaker.
Mm-hmm. I don't see MMA or martial arts or karate or boxing or anything like that as intrinsically toxic. I see it as people learning through discipline, through perseverance, through strength. Those are masculine and feminine traits to have. There's women's MMA, there's women's karate, there's women's boxing. I think where it goes into toxic territory is the egos that follow along with a lot of the people that are involved in those things. I myself love UFC. My wife and I both love UFC. We watch pretty much every pay-per-view that there is. What we love the most about it is the show of discipline, the show of skill that has been learned throughout years and years of dedicating to yourself to your passion, to your art. I don't see anything toxic about that. When what's toxic is, the Conor McGregors of the world who just keep yapping about I'm the best, and they're beating their chest and they're being that alpha male. You don't need to do that. You just need to, let your skills talk for you.
Well,
that's not toxic.
And I would agree with that, except for some of those people. And again, this is a small subshoot. I don't want to focus too much on this, but I think it's interesting. Except for when those people, that's how they're seen by society, and that's what society expects for them. But I just think that's an interesting concept, that a lot of these terms and a lot of this aggression and a lot of these traits that we've talked about, I think it's easy for society to kind of forgive those when it's in things that they find entertainment in, or they can make money off of, which I just wanted to kind of put that out there because I wanted to get your guys' opinion to say, is there ever a time when these traits are acceptable? And I would say in sports and competitions, I think that's where I would probably say that's the most acceptable space for having him. I just think that's a little bit, contradictory. Like, we don't want these things except for, what I just mentioned. So, Jamie, were you trying to say something? I think I might have cut you off.
Well, you usually do, but it's okay. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I think what's interesting, and I think what the takeaway for me from this conversation really is how, a mentor of mine once told me that she can tell when it's not okay, when it starts rubbing her wrong. You know what I mean? Like when a boundary has been crossed, or when she has maybe accepted things that she wouldn't normally accept. And it kind of relates to this conversation in that, like, we're talking toxic femininity and toxic masculinity and things like that. And the attitude with which my partner opens the door for me isn't with an air of, let me get that because you can't take care of yourself. It is, let me get that because I want to honor you and because I care for you. If I choose to make dinner in the evening, it's not because my job is to make dinner in the evening and to banish myself to the kitchen, but it's because I want to care for my family. Now, if I ever gets to a space where I am being told, woman, where's my dinner? Or, you're a terrible mom because you didn't feed your kids a home-cooked meal last night. Those are spaces where my boundaries have then been crossed, and that is toxic to me. And so I think, the takeaway for me really is to have those honest conversations in relationships to say, hey, this isn't working for me. Or if this isn't working for me, maybe this isn't the space for me, and to be able to honor ourselves in that way, to make sure that we can have those healthy conversations and those healthy boundaries with each other as people.
100% correct. That to me just tells me that your husband does not live within a toxic masculinity mindset. If you as a wife or as a partner, as a spouse, feel comfortable in having those conversations and saying, hey, this rubbed me the wrong way. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out, blah, 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 blah. If you feel comfortable in doing that and you don't expect a smack in the mouth for speaking up, I reckon you're probably not living in a toxic environment with someone who is under the umbrella of toxic masculinity. unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that cannot speak their mind and cannot set their own boundaries because of that fact.
Yeah.
Don't yell at me. I'll do what I want. I'm the man of the house. My word is God.
Yeah.
Shut your mouth. Speak when spoken to.
Yeah. It does exist a lot. Yeah.
And I think we need to, maybe allow a little bit of space in our conversation here to say, from a domestic violence perspective, there are some men who are abused by women in those kinds of relationships. And I think there are even times when men are forced into performing or having, I don't want to say rape, I don't know if I want to go that far, but engaging in some sort of action that they're not wanting to, but because is forced upon them. So I don't want to leave this space without saying, we've talked a lot about those effects, from on women, but there are some examples where men are the ones that are being victimized from domestic violence. And where I think it's kind of interesting is I can see where if that's happening, I can understand why some men don't report it, why some men don't say that, because they may be experiencing that where you shouldn't ever be beat up by a woman, right? There's a little bit of guilt associated with it, or there's some shame that goes along with it. And so that I can start recognizing, that's probably a form of that. And here it is working against the male, not for them. And so I just wanted to kind of leave that in the space here, just because I'm sure there might be some listeners that are maybe experiencing the averse of what we've been talking about.
Yeah, 100%.
What a great example of toxic masculinity also, the idea that, how can I ask for help because I shouldn't be the victim of physical violence from a female partner. That's some of that stigma too that wraps around the topic of toxic masculinity. So
I do want to bring up two things, and I just want to ask a question, Mahlon. With what you just said, totally agree. There are men in the world that unfortunately do have violence perpetrated against them from a female partner. I don't have the statistics, but I do wonder how many of those acts of violence from a female to male are perpetrated based on their gender and their gender alone. I don't think there's many females out there that are killing men or bashing men because I am female, my word is God. Don't you dare question my authority again. While there's probably cases out there that are that, I'd say resoundingly the main amounts of domestic violence from female to a male is because of that individual circumstances, whether it be mental health issues, schizophrenia, maybe they're just shit people, and we can probably put that down in society to a lot. We talked about Karens and the male equivalency. In Australia, we have one term, and I'm sorry to say it, and you can bleep it out, but it's just being a cunt.
Yeah, that's going to have to go.
I was going to say
that's fair enough. I'm sorry. In Australia, it's totally acceptable.
That's fine.
You must have known. In America, it's a little different.
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
And that's it, everyone. Thanks for listening. We're shutting it down.
Delete the whole thing. No, the one question I did want to ask you when you were hesitant to say rape when a man is forced or coerced to committing a sexual act that he did not necessarily consent to. Why did you feel the need to not call it what it intrinsically is? It is rape.
Why I stopped short is just because I don't know how much of that we wanted to get into in this conversation and how much we wanted to talk about, just because it is probably a very small subset of people. So that's the only reason why I was a little bit hesitant.
Okay. Can we all agree that rape is rape regardless of gender?
Oh, yes. Yes.
If there's not consent, regardless of what happens and how it happens, regardless of biology and you being erect versus psychology and you not consenting, it is rape.
I absolutely agree. I just think that the mix of that, regardless if it's male or female, bottom line, if you boil it down, if somebody's not giving consent, absolutely it's rape, regardless.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And it's not okay. The YouTube video about consent and tea. Have you seen that video? It's It's fantastic. I will try and remember to link it to the Facebook page after we release this episode, but it's a great video and really spells out consent in a very good way. So as a public service, we will post that on our Facebook page and Instagram too. So, well, Matt, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I have appreciated so much your perspective on this and your experience in this. And I know we've been really excited to have you on. So, again, your podcast is Touched Out Parenting. Is that correct?
Just the Touched Out podcast.
Touched Out podcast. I found it on Good Pods. That's where I listen to my podcasts. And look up Matt Carter's Touched Out podcast. It's really, really great. So when's your next season coming out?
There's no set date at the moment. I think I've given myself 2 months off. So probably, August? Around October sometime. Awesome. If you follow me on Instagram, there'll be some things that I post on there. I think I'm going to start running a giveaway soon as well. So if anyone listening wants to jump on that, get on our Instagram.
And you're on TikTok also. I love your TikTok videos. Those are fun.
Yeah, the TikTok. It's a weird kind of realm to be in. I'm not a content creator. I am just I'm trying to do the podcast thing. But I realize that to gain a little bit more of a following on TikTok, you have to post some silly videos here and there.
Yeah, so I just want to put that out there. So, Matt, you are one that we're kind of watching because I think we kind of fell into at least releasing podcasts kind of the same time. And so I've been looking at your TikTok, and there's one that I really liked where you're cleaning the kitchen on TikTok. And then you're like, God. And I was sitting there for a second. I'm like, where did he go? And then you came back on and explained it. And I was like, that is funny. And so it doesn't, the content, you say you're not a content creator. I was going to say, I almost disagree with you because I find all your stuff on there that is kind of entertaining, and there's a lot of value to it. So, I enjoy it as well on all the different platforms. So keep going. I think that's great stuff. And I look forward to this when you release more content. So thanks for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us.
More than welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Before you go, though, we're going to have to do this part all over again because I have one more question. I'm curious, what's in store for the next season of your podcast? Do you have a plan yet, or is there anything you can tease for us?
I have the entire of season 2 already recorded.
Oh, you do?
Yep. So I'm not too sure on how many episodes I'm going to release. For now, the big teaser I'll give you is that I plan on releasing at the very least 3 episodes for the season 2 premiere.
Oh, like a 3-parter?
It'll be 3 different episodes. So 3 different guests. I'll just release them on the same day as the premiere so everyone can kind of sink their teeth into some new content. There's some really, really cool guests for season 2. I'm planning a couple of different things. I've got a guest from a previous episode in season 1. I'm not sure if you've watched all of the episodes, but Becca and Brian. Becca runs a podcast called The Human Podcast. Brian is her husband. Him and I have found a beautiful friendship within each other, and we talk quite often. He's a amazing musician and music producer, engineer, sorry. So he is currently working on revamping the podcast intro music, which will be pretty cool.
Very cool.
And I think I'm going to have some sponsorships going on, which will give me a little bit more exposure, which is super cool. But yeah, apart from that, I've got some really, really cool guests who have some amazing stories, and different perspectives and different, traumas that they've gone through. I'm very excited. I think the one I'm excited most for is an amazing girl named Aaron, from Canada. And she was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent chemotherapy and had a double mastectomy. all while she was pregnant / a new mother.
Oh, wow.
Goodness.
So it's a pretty harrowing journey, but she an amazing guest. Had a good cry.
That's amazing. I'm really excited to binge listen the 3 episodes. So make sure to email me and let me know when that's coming because I'm excited. But
Of course, always.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Matt. And we will definitely look forward to visiting with you again. And it's been a good conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much again for having me.
bet.
Appreciate it. It wasn't nearly as heated as I thought it would be, Mahlon.
He's growing.
Hey, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not scaring guests off. So, like we had another one that we just recorded, and they are going to be coming back, I think, a little bit later, and we're going to get into more of a debate. So, I appreciate these types of conversations. Where I think it helped us is I don't think I was too far away or out of a line with you. I do think there's some differences, which we've talked about, and I think that's probably where we were the most different. But for the most part, I think we both recognize that there's nuances and there's differences and there's things that are toxic, and I think that helped. But no, I will. Next time we talk, you come on and we will pick a topic that we surely debate. How about equality in the workplace, Jamie? Part 2.
I thought we decided we were walking away from that one.
Be careful, Mahlon, your toxic masculinity show.
I was going to say, Matt, you had some great insights about that. So maybe we could do a part 2 with you two, and then I will just listen.
Matt, I would love it. Come on, let's talk about it. Let's talk about some more.
Maybe one day.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we will chat with you soon.
Bye, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999 or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.